All right, so welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today we're tackling Islamic beliefs and teachings, but get this. We're going beyond the usual stuff and exploring some pretty unexpected interpretations, some concepts that'll really make you think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We've got a pretty diverse mix of sources here. We've got like excerpts from this text. It analyzes the Quran's spiritual side, and then we've got discussions about reincarnation, even a figure named Sant Rampal Ji Maharaj. Oh, and there's analysis of Surah Al-Ikhlas and some common Islamic phrases too. It's less about telling you what to believe, more about presenting what these sources actually say. You might even come away seeing some Islamic concepts in a whole new light.
Exactly. It's kind of like we've got this treasure map of Islamic thought, right? And each source we look at gives us another clue. Who knows? Maybe we'll find some big aha moments along the way.
Oh, for sure.
So let's kick things off with a big question. Where does the Quran's knowledge actually come from? This source, it makes a pretty bold claim. It suggests that the knowledge didn't come directly from God.
It's definitely a different perspective, and to back it up, they point to a specific verse, Quran Sharif 25.59. This verse describes a being who is separate from God but is giving this knowledge. And get this being even admits to not fully understanding God.
So it's like someone trying to explain a really complicated idea that they don't fully get themselves.
Exactly. It's like, hey, I'm learning this too.
Yeah, and then it goes on to say that to really get it, to really get that spiritual understanding, you need to seek out a Bakabar. That's like a well-informed saint, someone who's got it figured out.
Right, like they're pointing us to another source of knowledge, someone with, a deeper understanding.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And it makes you wonder, well, who is this intermediary, right?
Exactly. Well, the source actually throws out some names like Kush or Purush or Al. They suggest these figures played a role in getting that Quranic knowledge to Prophet Muhammad.
So like messengers, maybe, passing along a divine message, but not directly from the main source?
Yeah, think of it that way, like the middleman, so to speak.
Okay, so speaking of Prophet Muhammad, the source even talks about his initial reaction to the angel Gabriel. Like they say he was scared, hesitant even.
Yeah, and that leads to a pretty big question. Would a truly merciful God, would he instill knowledge through force or fear?
That's a really good point. It kind of makes you think about the nature of divine communication, right?
Definitely. It's like, is that how a loving God operates?
Okay, let's switch gears a bit here. Let's talk about something that might surprise some people. Reincarnation in Islam. A lot of folks think Islam doesn't teach rebirth, but this source, it begs to differ.
Oh, it definitely challenges the usual understanding. And they pull out some Quranic verses to make their case, like look at Quran Sharif 67.2, for example. It talks about God creating life and death as a test. And the source, they interpret this as a cycle, actions and consequences, karma basically. What you did in past lives, it's affecting you now.
Oh, that's interesting. So your past actions are shaping your present.
Exactly. It all comes back around.
Okay, and it gets even more interesting because then they bring in Surah Al-Anbiya 21.104. This one mentions God recreating the universe. And they see this as evidence that existence is cyclical, like it's like a hint at rebirth.
Right. It's not just a one-time thing. And this is where they bring in, they introduce Sant Rampal Ji Maharaj. He's a spiritual leader who teaches that this whole reincarnation thing, this soul being reborn into different forms, it's not, limited to one religion. It applies to all faiths, Islam included.
So it's like a universal concept.
Yeah, it's bigger than any one religion.
Got it. And they give examples, right? Like figures who they believe went through this rebirth process.
Yeah, for example, they talk about Kamali transforming into Rabia Basri, this, well-respected female mystic. And then there's Sultan Ibrahim ibn Adam, who supposedly he lived multiple lives before becoming a king.
Wow, that's pretty wild to think about.
Think of it like your soul is on this massive road trip, right? And each life is a different stop along the way. You're learning, evolving with each new experience.
Okay, I like that analogy.
That's the essence of reincarnation, how this source presents it.
Okay, now let's get into something potentially a bit sensitive here. Meat consumption in Islam. This source, they really take a critical look at the practice of animal sacrifice during Bakr Eid,
Yeah.
They question if it really lines up with the idea of a loving God.
It's a tough question, right? I mean, if God created all life, how can he be happy about the taking of life, even if it's, in his name? They want us to really examine those justifications for animal sacrifice.
Yeah, it makes you think. And they also point out the belief that that a prayer can send an animal's soul to heaven.
Right, like it's a guaranteed ticket.
Exactly. And they challenge that. They say, well, if it's so easy, why aren't people, lining up to be sacrificed?
Yeah, it makes you wonder, right?
For sure. And then they contrast this whole thing with the example of Prophet Muhammad. According to their understanding, he never killed an animal, and he even brought a dead cow back to life.
Right, like a demonstration of deep respect for animal life.
Yeah, total contrast, right?
Totally. And they also bring up Rabia Basri again. She was known for her compassion. They tell a story about her showing kindness to a thirsty dog, even a dog. It highlights that, that potential for mercy toward all living things, even in Islam.
Right, that compassion extends to all creatures.
Exactly. It seems like they're pushing for a kinder interpretation of Islamic teachings, one that really values the sacredness of life and discourages violence, especially towards animals.
Yeah, I can see that. And they don't beat around the bush about their stance either. They straight up say that eating meat, it's sinful and will lead to suffering in future lives.
Oh yeah, they're very clear about that.
It's a bold statement for sure. And it just shows how different interpretations of religious texts can lead to totally different ideas about right and wrong, about how we should live.
For sure. It reminds us that even within one faith, there's a whole range of beliefs and practices.
Absolutely. Okay, now get ready for this. They talk about the form of God in Islam, and they argue that contrary to what a lot of people believe, the Quran actually shows God as having a form.
Yeah, it's another one of those perspective shifts. They point to Quran Sharif 25.59 again, the one that describes God sitting on a throne, and they say, look, this means he has a physical form, not just some abstract, formless being.
Huh. Okay, so not just an idea, but an actual being.
Right.
And they bring up other verses too, right? Ones that show God actively creating things, like making humans from water, setting up relationships, even separating the salty seas from the fresh water.
Oh yeah, all those actions, they say those imply a physical being doing the work.
Like rolling up his sleeves and getting things done.
Exactly. It makes you rethink things, right? Like how much of what we believe is actually from the texts themselves versus what we've been told.
It's a really good question. Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. They say that no matter what name we use, God is ultimately just one being. And his real name, the true name, according to different texts, is Kabir.
It's a bold claim, and they back it up by going back to the Quran, specifically Quran Sharif 25.52. Remember the one where that being, that knowledge giver, separate from God, tells Prophet Muhammad to reject the disbelievers and follow Lord Kabir.
Right.
They say that's pointing us towards Kabir as the true God.
And get this, they claim that this Kabir, he's the same being who took Prophet Muhammad to this heavenly realm called Satlak. But Muhammad, he chose to come back to Earth.
Yeah, it's a whole new layer to the story, right? Adds another dimension to our understanding of Islam and how it might connect to other spiritual traditions that also revere Kabir.
It's a pretty fascinating connection.
Oh, for sure. And then they highlight Quran Sharif 25.58. It describes this saint as being immortal and the only one who knows all sins and can actually forgive them.
So like ultimate power, ultimate knowledge.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and then they go on to say that Kabir, he's back on Earth. Like he's reappeared as this guy named Saint Rampalji Maharaj. And he's teaching the real deal, the correct spiritual path, revealing all these hidden truths.
Yeah, it's like they're laying out a very specific interpretation of Islam, one that puts Kabir right at the center and says this Saint Rampalji Maharaj is his current form.
Wow. Okay. So much to unpack here. It seems like they're weaving all these verses, stories, interpretations together to create this picture of Islam that's probably pretty unfamiliar to a lot of people.
Definitely. They're presenting a whole new perspective.
All right, so we're back, diving deeper into these Islamic beliefs and teachings. Before the break, we were getting into some pretty mind-blowing stuff about how the Quran is interpreted, and now I think it's time to zero in on Surah Al-Ikhlas. Specifically, we're going to look at its connection to Allah Kabir.
Yeah, so for anyone who might not know, Surah Al-Ikhlas is like a short but powerful chapter in the Quran. It's a key declaration of Islamic monotheism, that belief in one God. And what's really interesting here is how this source links Surah Ikhlas to the concept of Allah Kabir, presenting Allah Kabir as the supreme God.
Okay, so how do they even connect those two ideas?
Well, they actually break down Surah Al-Ikhlas verse by verse and show how each one, how its description of God kind of lines up with how Allah Kabir is described in various spiritual texts. It's like they're drawing these parallels, finding this common thread between Islamic teachings and other traditions that also revere Kabir.
Okay, so like finding these connections across different beliefs.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so let's take a closer look at Surah Al-Ikhlas verse by verse then. So the first one, say, He is Allah who is one, that emphasizes God's oneness, right?
Right, and the source interprets this as reflecting Allah Kabir being the only one, the ultimate divine being, like the source of everything. And to really drive this home, they even tell a story about Kabir's birth. They say that during his naming ceremony, the letters of the Quran, they miraculously turned into Kabir Kabir.
Oh, wow, that's a pretty powerful image.
It is.
It's almost like the Quran is like pointing towards Kabir's true identity.
Yeah, it's a fascinating interpretation, isn't it? And the source, they don't stop there. They move on to the second verse, Allah is the eternal refuge. And they connect that to the idea of Allah Kabir offering constant protection and guidance to his followers.
So like he's a sanctuary.
Exactly. Like no matter what, he's there for you. And to really reinforce this, they bring in a verse from a different part of the Quran, Surah of Furqan 25.58. It mentions that Kabir Allah he can erase the sins of his followers. Like that's a big deal, right?
Yeah, that's a lot of power.
It's like ultimate forgiveness. It's pretty fascinating how they weave in all these different verses from different parts of the Quran to build this case for Kabir's supremacy.
Yeah, like they're connecting all these different pieces.
Yeah, like a puzzle.
Okay, so then we have the third verse of Surah Al-Ikhlas, He neither begets nor is born. That one really emphasizes that God, he's beyond, birth and death, which is something a lot of religions talk about.
Exactly. It's that idea of being eternal.
Right.
And the source, of course, they connect that to Kabir. They say Kabir's also immortal, beyond the limits of time and space. And they emphasize how Kabir's appearance on Earth was unique. Not a normal birth, not a typical physical body, but significantly, he could bring others back to life.
So like real power over life and death.
Exactly. It's pretty different from other prophets or spiritual figures who, they died and left their bodies behind.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
It seems like the source is really pointing out how unique Kabir is, putting him in a category all his own.
Okay, then there's the fourth verse, the final verse of Surah Al-Ikhlas. There is none comparable unto him.
Right, emphasizing that ultimate greatness and uniqueness.
Exactly.
And the source, they tie this back to Kabir by mentioning the belief that he actually ascended to Sablok, the eternal realm, with his physical body.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and again, that sets him apart from other figures, right? They didn't ascend in that way. It's like the source is saying, look, if you really understand Surah Al-Ikhlas, you understand Kabir. They're basically using it as a framework for understanding him.
Okay, so that's Surah Al-Ikhlas. Now let's switch gears a bit and possible two phrases that are super important in Islam. La ilaha illallah and Allahu Akbar. This source, they suggest that these phrases have even deeper connections to God Kabir than most people realize. So let's start with La ilaha illallah, which basically means there is no deity but God, a pretty fundamental declaration of faith.
Right, like a core belief in Islam. But the source, they're suggesting it goes deeper than just that. They're saying it implies that true salvation, freedom from this whole cycle of birth and death, that comes from seeking refuge specifically in God Kabir. It's like saying, yes, there's one God, and that God is Kabir.
Okay, so it's specifying who that God is.
Yeah, exactly. And they actually quote Prophet Muhammad to support this. He's believed to have said that sincerely reciting Layla Shalallah, it opens the doors to heaven.
Wow, so like a direct path.
Yeah, pretty powerful. And they also bring up Mullah Ali Qari, who was a respected Islamic scholar. He believed that even people who had sinned, they could be forgiven through invoking Kabir's name.
So even if you've made mistakes, there's still a way to find redemption.
Right, through Kabir. It's like they're expanding the meaning of this really basic Islamic phrase and linking it directly to the power of Kabir's name.
Okay, that's Layla. What about Allahu Akbar, which means God is the greatest?
Right. So the source, they say that this phrase, even though it's used in all sorts of contexts, it ultimately praises God Kabir's power, his role as the creator. And they emphasize that Allahu Akbar, it's bigger than any one religion. It's about recognizing that single supreme God, no matter what name you use for him.
So like a universal expression of praise and recognition of God Kabir.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes you think, if these core Islamic phrases can be interpreted as referring to God Kabir, how does that change how we see Islam's relationship with other spiritual traditions that also follow him? It's a really interesting connection they're making,
Yeah, a lot to think about there.
for sure.
Okay, so now let's shift our focus to Prophet Muhammad's life and teachings. This source, it gives a pretty concise biography, starting with his family, his early life.
Yeah, they begin with the story of his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, who he almost sacrificed his own son. That's Prophet Muhammad's father, to fulfill a vow to Allah.
Wow, so like a test of faith.
Oh yeah, big time. It really highlights the intensity of belief and the difficult decisions people make in the name of religion.
Definitely.
So from there, they go into Prophet Muhammad's childhood. He was an orphan. They talk about his marriage to Khadija and then his spiritual experiences that led him to becoming a prophet, like those powerful encounters in the Hira cave where he first received revelations from the angel Gabriel.
Right, a huge turning point.
Totally, the beginning of his whole mission.
Yeah, that's a pivotal moment, not just for him, but for history.
Absolutely. And the source then, it gets into the challenges he faced once he started preaching. They talk about the opposition he got, the battles he had to fight to protect his community, even the circumstances surrounding his death.
Yeah, it's a story of perseverance, for sure. Facing all that adversity, but still holding on to his faith and continuing to spread Allah's message.
Exactly. And here's where they tie Prophet Muhammad back to our earlier discussion about Kabir. They mention the belief that Kabir actually met Prophet Muhammad and took him to Satlok, that eternal place. But Muhammad chose to come back to Earth.
So he had choice.
Right. It adds another layer to this whole idea, right?
Yeah, it makes it even more complex.
And finally, they highlight some of Prophet Muhammad's key teachings: kindness, brotherhood, worshiping one God, rejecting idol worship, and unnecessary killing of animals. It's interesting because even though animal sacrifice is practiced by a lot of Muslims today, they point out that Prophet Muhammad himself, he was against cruelty to animals.
The practice might have changed over time.
Right, yeah, interpretations evolve.
Okay, so we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. The origins of the Quran, reincarnation, the form of God, Islamic phrases, Prophet Muhammad's life. It's a lot.
It is, and it's clear we're just scratching the surface, right? But we're going to have to wrap up this episode soon, so get ready for some final thoughts and a question that might leave you thinking about all this long after we're done. Stay tuned.
All right, welcome back for the final part of our deep dive. I got to say, my head is it's kind of spinning after going through all these different interpretations and ideas.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind tour of Islamic beliefs and teachings, that's for sure. I think as we wrap things up, it's good to step back and think about the bigger picture. What are the main takeaways here? What can we learn from all these sources?
Well, one thing that really jumps out at me is how different these interpretations are from what you usually hear about Islam. It's like they're offering a whole new perspective.
Right. They make you question what you thought you knew. Like, think about that idea that the Quran itself, that it might actually contain like clues pointing to this supreme God named Kabir. That's pretty mind-blowing,
Yeah, it really is. And then there's that whole reincarnation thing. We saw how some people interpret those Quranic verses to support that idea. It challenges that common belief that rebirth isn't part of Islam.
Right. And we can't forget about that emphasis on a more compassionate view of Islam, especially when it comes to animals. That argument against eating meat, using examples like Prophet Muhammad bringing a dead cow back to life, Rabia Basri's kindness, it makes you think about your own choices, your own ethics.
It's like they're saying, look, there's this whole other way of seeing Islamic teachings, one that focuses on compassion, how we're all connected, and this idea of a supreme God that's bigger than any one religion.
Exactly. So as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final question, something to really think about. If the Quran, as these sources interpret it, if it really does point towards a supreme God named Kabir, and if figures like Prophet Muhammad really did interact with him, how does that change how you understand Islam and what it teaches?
It's a huge question, and I think it's one that could lead to a lot of reflection.
Yeah, and that's really what we wanted to do here, not to give you all the answers, but to open up some new ways of thinking, encourage you to explore these ideas on your own. Maybe this deep dive will spark some curiosity, something that'll stick with you.
Keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and who knows what you might discover. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey.
Until next time, keep diving deep.